Morning, everybody. Good morning to those here that have joined us this morning, and good morning to those of you at home. We feel you here with us in presence, so welcome. We are doing our first lifelong learning presentation today, so thank you for your patience with us as we've figured out the best way to do this. It's been a bit of a challenge, but as you know, we're all adapting to new things during this pandemic time. So today we're talking about spirituality, and as we get ready to bring in our speaker, a couple things we just wanted to talk about as we always start first with some discussion amongst us, and hopefully those at home can have some discussion with whoever you're with today. And if any of your children are there with you and the families that are there today, we hope that you can have some discussion as well. And if you want to pop in any comments in the comment box, we can see those come in and we can share that as well. So the first question we wanted to bring forth is, what is spirituality to you? What does spirituality mean to you? So we'll give a minute if you just want to discuss amongst yourselves or across the aisles here. We're very socially distanced down here in Vogel Hall, so people will have to kind of talk amongst the space. But go ahead and have a minute and we'll come back.
Put an overlay.
No, we're fine. I'm going to give Laura some of the feedback that there, if any.
How many have joined from home?
Over here. Look real fast. Give me a second. He's not connecting.
Put an overlay.
Hello. If you have made any comments at home, if you can go ahead and retype the comment so that Laura can see your comments. So the question was, what is spirituality to you? Is that the question, right?
Yep.
All right. So I want to bring up the comments here. Okay. So we have 19 people on. So if you can type your comment, the question was, and we're about 30-second delay. The question was, what is spirituality?
So while we're waiting for you to type in any comments that you might have, we'll ask the people here. Do you want to share anything what spirituality means to you? Just go ahead and raise your hand, or Monique.
To me, it's through prayers, meditation, reading, and working on a relationship with God.
So Monique is saying prayers, relationship with God, working meditation, and working on your relationship with God. Anybody else want to share? We have a comment on our Facebook that says, having a personal relationship with God, the way I feed my soul. That's another good one. Anybody else like to comment or share? Linda?
Feeling within of being connected to the rest of the
A feeling within and being connected to God and to the rest of the world. And we have another comment from Sheila, expressing love for God. A good one. All right. So then our second question is, how has your spirituality changed during the pandemic? We're all in a different mode of, practicing our faith, whether at home, here at church, and it's been a long stretch since, really January of last year, when we've all been hearing about this and having to deal with it. How has it changed your spirituality? There may be some good ways and bad ways that it has changed your spirituality. So maybe just reflect on that and share with those around you.
No, not this way. I would set it different.
So you're saying a plus and a minus, right? So Joni's saying a plus and a minus. So it's a more relaxed world, she feels like. But then also at home, practicing our spirituality has made her potentially feel a little bit guilty because we're not doing it the way we're normally doing it. We're in our pajamas and in our easy chair. And maybe that feels not quite right to us. And we feel a little guilty that we can't be present. Yes. Good. Yeah. So for, I forget your, Jean. Yeah. So Jean here is saying that it helped her put things in perspective, making it more clear to her what to focus on, maybe, and just don't sweat the small stuff. So that's a good way to reflect on it. Maria has listed here that it has allowed her more time to reflect on her relationship with God. We have less of busyness, right? There's no events going on, there's less things that we need to be doing. So it has given her more time to reflect, and I think all of us to reflect on time with God. Also, we have, I rely more in Christ during this time, another comment we have here. And Maria's saying, being concerned for my spirit and my soul instead of material things. So that's another good one. Anybody else have a comment? Monique.
Also, you feel more connected with the rest of the world. You feel less material because you don't go shopping, you don't go out to eat. So you have more time to reflect and pray, but you also have time to think and maybe be a little more generous for all the poor people who are really suffering.
So more time to reflect and pray and feel more connected, even though we may not think we are connected, but we're not necessarily going out to eat or to other things. So it's forcing us to be connected in a different way, and think about things differently and how best to stay connected. I think for me, the spirituality piece has been a challenge during this time. You know, it's been easy to get comfortable, like we said, in our pajamas and maybe not think about it quite as much, but it certainly does give you more time to reflect and think about things and maybe do some reading and things that we didn't have time to do in the past. So Father Juan, he joined us. So do you want to answer one of the questions? So how has your spirituality changed during the pandemic? Yeah, I'm putting you on the spot.
I think like the pandemic has been know that we had put together this online ministry and all this work that's out there online, and one of the things that you really need to do, and I think it's for me, has been that I have to increase my family time preparation and my prayer time. So I have to change my almost waking up habits. So I now wake up a little bit earlier than I used to. But to prepare in that sense for the holiday, because one thing is when you are preaching to 4 or 5 people who would come to daily mass, but now you are online and we have anywhere from 30 to 40 people and also stays there online. And I don't say that I didn't prepare before, but it's a different because you have like a communal discussion that is there, but now you have to be mindful that is reaching out to many other people, and it almost have been talking to some friends, and it's like who also do like the online ministry, say it's like every day we are preparing a family for a Sunday mass.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I can change more time for prayer.
That's a good answer. Maybe you should come over here and tell the people at home, because I didn't hear anything you said.
Good job. I can. Should I summarize briefly?
Summarize
So Father Juan said he has to wake up earlier, So he has time to prepare his homilies because it's much different in this time frame of almost every day is like a Sunday for him because he has to make sure his homilies are well presented. And not that he didn't prepare in the past, but it's just different this time because he knows he has to stay connected and reach out to those that aren't physically present. And so that it's just a lot more time of prayer and preparation for him during this time of the pandemic. Is that fair? Okay, good. All right. Anybody else have a comment? And before we move on, I first want to thank Eloy and Dulce here and Chris Koleski. I know that they worked hard at the end of this week to try to make sure this is all working. And we're trying something new today, so bear with us. Jim Gill, who is our presenter today, he's actually joining us from his home as well. And so we're going to bring him in on the screen, and hopefully you can see him. There he is. So we see Jim. Can we hear you?
You will in a second.
Oh, Eloy is getting us ready. No dancing.
Okay, Jim, you should be able to speak and we should be able to hear you.
Okay. Am I supposed to see you or just me?
With us today.
Just you, Jim.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Are you ready for me to start then?
All right, we're going to get you started in 1 second, Jim. Bear with us.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't know if you want to do an intro or
Yeah.
if you wanted to go.
That's what we're working on.
Okay, no problem.
Go ahead.
Okay, so welcome to Jim Gill here. We thank you for joining us today. Jim has a background in spirituality and has been involved in youth and adult formation for over 35 years in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And he has previously been also a programming chair at the Siena Center and is now retired, but he's still doing some freelancing work. He's also a spiritual guidance person and continues to do that in retirement as well. So he was willing to join us today to talk to us about spirituality in our changing times. So we welcome you, Jim. Some of you may remember Jim from last year. He presented for us on St. Patrick's Day. So we're lucky to bring him back. He was happy to join us. So please welcome Jim here and at home. Thank you.
As you probably picked up last time, it's one of my favorite topics. And today we want to just talk a little bit about the basics of spirituality. What is it? And then look at a study that was done by the Fetzer Institute. And I'll say more about that when we get to that point. So I'd like you to spend just a few moments in quiet thinking about this question as we begin. What do you think spirituality means? Now you might have, you might have the handout in front of you. So I'm going to ask you not to use that as a cheat sheet as we do this little brainstorming, but just what does it mean to you in your own words? So just think about that. Maybe if you want to write it down or include it on your handout, however you want to do that. Just a few moments to think about that. All right. So if you are at the parish and you're sitting at a table with some folks, I don't know how close you're sitting to each other, if you can have a discussion or not, but maybe share with one other person what you think spirituality means. Okay. Eloy, do you still have the handout original that you could share on the screen for folks?
Yeah, I can share it.
Okay, that would be great. It's not doing it on my end for some reason. Disappears. Well, while he's getting that up, I'll just say a few things about spirituality in a broader sense. It's a very popular topic today. You may have heard the term nuns, Nones, for people who respond on surveys when you have to check your religious preference. They check none. And maybe you've heard the term or the phrase, I'm spiritual but not religious, and thought, well, how can that be? For those of us who are used to connecting with a specific tradition or a specific faith community, that seems a little odd. How can you be spiritual if you don't go to church or, say I'm a Catholic or a Lutheran or a Methodist or whatever? And that's part of what the Fetzer study was looking at, was how does this work? And since it's such a trend, such a phenomenon. And they did their study long before we were into the COVID situation. So that may change things dramatically. But spirituality in our Catholic tradition finds its roots in the biblical literature that we have, the Bible, and in the lived experience of the early church, including the apostles, of course, and Jesus himself. And throughout the history of the church, there's been a really wide variety of approaches to spirituality. So, unlike some other traditions that might be founded around a specific spirituality, our Catholic tradition is like a library of spiritualities, or a menu of spiritualities that throughout time have been adapted to different times and places. And there's always new things developing, so it's not static. It continues to grow and develop. So today, when we talk about some of these terms, I'm waiting for see if you can get the screen share up. I'm ready for that anytime, Eloy. Today we talk about spirituality as sometimes distinct from religion. It says he's working on it. Okay. So I'm going to just start with some of the terms that are on the handout, even though some of you don't see it yet. First term that we think about is, what is faith? And in its broadest sense, faith has been defined as a set of dogmas, doctrines, or beliefs to which one gives assent. Now, in our tradition, we have this distinction between a doctrine and a dogma. Doctrines are teachings of the church, and dogmas are teachings that are considered central to our identity, and are often what we call promulgated or made official by the church itself, either usually in a written document of some kind, whether that's a encyclical, or in our own most recent experience, at least mine. Some of you are much younger than me. The Second Vatican Council was considered a dogmatic pronouncement, the documents of Vatican II. So in our tradition, we have this idea of dogmas and doctrines, and also beliefs. And we share that with all traditions. When we talk about church, we're using it in its broadest sense to refer to a group of believers. Oh, looks like we're getting our screen share here. Hey, perfect. So church is, when it, again, in its broadest sense, refers to a group of believers. And we know that Vatican II expanded our understanding of church. Before Vatican II, we often thought of church as being, the priest, the pope, the bishops, and also the sisters. They were the church. They spoke for the church, and or we went to church. We use that term in many different ways. We go to church. The building is the church, and now in the Vatican II era, we say we are the church. We're the group of believers. That is the church. Religion, in its broadest sense, refers to a commitment or devotion to a religious faith or observances. And it might include participation in church in terms of formal membership or attendance. But as we'll see in the study, it doesn't necessarily imply that that's a necessity. Now, within the Christian church, Christian denomination, or Christian tradition, there are denominations which refer to religious organizations founded around a unifying set of beliefs and practices. So there's some set of belief and practices that a group of believers holds in common, and they protect that, they teach it, they pass it on. And then spirituality is the quality or state of being religious, and it includes practices and approaches to the practice of faith. So you can see how these kind of build on each other, and they fit together. So today, when we talk about spirituality, it's very broad. So let's look real quickly at a couple of the definitions that I've collected over time. And I'm going to focus on these definitions, not all of them, because we want to look at the study too. But the first one, I think, is really something that is very important for us to realize. I want to say quickly, though, first a little bit about dualisms and what we call a dialectic thinking. Dualistic thinking sees things as either or, and dialectic thinking sees things as what we say both and. And in other words, there's not clear lines between two things. And we know that's from our personal lives where we have to make decisions and it's like, well, it's not clearly a yes or no, a positive or negative choice. That would be an example of what it means to be in a situation where you're dealing with a dialectic, where it's like there's some positives and negatives to each side. And for many centuries, we as Christians had this dualistic way of thinking of things. There was our spirit, our soul, and there was our flesh. And the goal of our spirituality was to get out of our flesh, out of our world, this material world, to the spiritual world, for our soul to leave our body and go to another place, which we call heaven. And today, spiritual authors are beginning to see that this is really not faithful to our original roots in the scriptures, this dualistic way of thinking, that it really came from when our faith was being translated into a world that spoke primarily Greek and thought Greek. Even the Romans adopted a lot of Greek thought. So that's something to keep in mind, that today spirituality is looked at in a very dialectic way. So this first quote that I have on here is from an author, a speaker. I would call him a spiritual theologian. I don't know if he'd call himself that, because that's not was never his primary work as a religious. His name is Dermot O'Murchu. He lives in Dublin, Ireland, and he's a member of a religious community, a small religious community, something like the Society of the Trinity or something like that. And yet he has written many books on spirituality and coming out of his own experience as a marriage and family therapist, actually, is what he had been doing most when he was working. He now works for his community. And he says this very profound thing that kind of will color all of these definitions, I think. And he says, we live in a spiritually saturated universe. In other words, the creation around us is spiritual too. And that's because that's where we have the most of our experiences is through this material universe that we live in, that, this is where we find God. So he's saying we live in a spiritually saturated universe. Now that really flies in the face of that idea of, the creation and everything is just an illusion and it's not good. We're trying to get to the good place, get out of this place. So that's a challenge to all of us to change that understanding of what, how we see creation, how we see ourselves, our own bodies, and all the things around us, all the things that we see. So let's scroll down to, there's a group of definitions that is also from Dermot, and it's taken from his book, Rediscovering Spirituality, which I would highly recommend. He usually is pretty easy to understand. He's not, real heavy theology necessarily. Some of his books get into the intersection of science and spirituality, which is another whole topic that we really won't have time to get into today. But and those can get a little technical, but they're also worth looking at. In his book, rediscovering spirituality, he says he likes lists, so he has his little bullet points here. Spirituality is an innate quality of human life and existence. We are born with it. In other words, we are spiritual beings by our very nature. And we also then are continuously seeking to articulate it and to live it. So there's a real important message here of the idea of you grow spiritually over time. Your spirituality as a child was different than your spirituality now, and it'll be different when you're, in your 80s. Every age has its own spirituality for us. And the things around us change too as the world changes. He says it is one of life's greatest gifts to us, and we have been entrusted with its care and development. That's a very, I think, Vatican II message is this idea of our ongoing faith development. There was a time when, if people were confirmed, when they were confirmed, they felt that was it. I'm a Catholic now. I know everything I need to know. I don't have to learn everything. I'm ready. Hit the road. And today we don't say that. That's why we have sessions like this for parents and adults, because we're continuing our faith development throughout. And that idea that it's entrusted to us, it's a gift, in other words. It's a co-creative gift being offered and received in large or small measure. This term co-creative is a term that's used a lot in spirituality circles today. And it means that it's both between us and God. God is the creator. That's how God is depicted in the book of Genesis, is a creator. And then in the story, the creation is handed over to us. And we are charged with its growth and development. Sometimes we see that in a light where, it's like subdue the earth in a negative sense, but it's really a positive thing. It's not use it up and throw it away. It's develop it, keep it going. You are now the creators, and we believe that through our work and our prayer and what we do in the world, we continue this creative operation, this creative action of God. So our spirituality is a co-creative gift to be continually developed. He then says it is to be discovered and lived in mutual relation with Earth and the cosmos. So that's the whole idea of we are in relationship with our environment. I think Pope Francis really brought this out in his encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si. We are entrusted with creation. We are in relationship with it. And it is something that is a common experience of all people. So it's what unites us as people throughout the world, is the fact that we live in this environment, in this world. And today, there's a lot of work done, especially in the area of physics, that is beginning to what their findings are beginning to apply to spiritual ideas, spiritual concepts. Some of the nature of the universe and things that we're discovering about it connect completely with what we believe religiously. And there's a lot of things written about the intersection of faith and science. We don't have time to get into that today, but if you wanted me to come back sometime, we could talk about that. It's sometimes referred to as cosmology. My undergraduate degree is in biology. So when I went to study spirituality, I was able to begin to make these connections. Never was very good at physics, but I can understand some of those things too. Our spirituality, then he says, is made up of conscious and unconscious factors, which we must acknowledge and integrate. Integrate sounds like a lot of work, and it can be. I mean, we call it spiritual work. But we have to acknowledge that we are physical beings. We have psychological, makeups, we have personality types, we have hang-ups, we have all kinds of things that can, get us off track in terms of our spirituality. And we have to acknowledge those things and work through them and understand how they make us the unique people that we are, and yet be aware of pitfalls in our own personality in that. So there's a lot of subconscious things, and part of the work of spiritual guidance or direction when you work with a director or guide is they notice those kinds of things and help you to bring them forth gently. It's not therapy, but it tries to look at the spiritual side of these things. And finally, he says its power, in other words, spirituality's power, is at least as powerful as, and probably more powerful than, our strongest instinctual drives and desires. So it's a very strong factor in our lives. All right, so those are some of the terms. There's other definitions there that you're welcome to read over and think about. And if you have any questions, I don't think I put my email on here, unfortunately, but I think Eloy can share that with you. And if you ever have questions or anything, feel free to email me. As I said, this is one of my favorite topics, and I love to work with it. So let's look at the Fetzer study now. Real quickly, the Fetzer Institute is located in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And they were founded by John Fetzer, who was an early pioneer in radio and technology. And also, he had a great spiritual sense of spiritual seeking sense within him. Okay, keep on scrolling down. There we are. Okay. And so this institute was founded out of his estate, and they run some retreat centers, and they focus on the topics of spiritual formation and in what we call an interspiritual world, not any specific tradition or denomination or belief system, but spirituality in its broadest sense. And they also focus on issues having to do with democracy and issues specifically affecting southwestern Michigan. As I said, they're in Kalamazoo. So they decided to do this study. I don't know when it exactly started, but the report is now out. And they called it an inquiry into the spiritual and civic dimensions of our nature. So as it says, it's an inquiry into what spirituality looks like for people of all spiritual and religious backgrounds across the country. Through illuminating personal stories and survey data, the study reveals how the spiritual dimensions of our nature informs our understandings of ourselves and each other, inspires us to take action in our communities, and implores us to find love everywhere we turn. So that's their reason, their statement of purpose for this study. And you can see how it integrates their areas of interest, the spirituality, democracy, community involvement, and especially in their area. So the question they dealt with is, what does spirituality mean to people in the United States today? And what effect does it have on community and political engagement? And as with all of these professional studies, they have a process that they used very carefully figured out. You can read a little bit about how they did that they listened, they had focus groups, came up with questions, and then they surveyed more than 3,600 people in January, February of this year. And their broad summary is, if you scroll down a little more, what we learned. First, it's human to be spiritual. In other words, it's part of our quality, like we saw in the definitions. like laughing with a loved one, like telling stories about where we come from, like confronting a long held fear. Spirituality is an essential element of existence that can bring beauty to our lives and animate us in powerful ways. Secondly, spirituality is often hidden from us. For some, it's a private practice to connect with the divine. For others, it is a quiet presence, lacking language or form. And for others, it's the current beneath religious devotion, an experience of deep peace and profound love. Devotion is another term. Perhaps I should have that on that opening list of terms. Um, we say we're devoted to something, but we also, in our tradition especially, we have devotions like the rosary or a litany or, those kinds of things, a novena. So there are more practices that we engage in. Thirdly, they say, as we heard from thousands of people across the United States, it became clear that one truth unites all these experiences. Spirituality is the foundation for a loving world. So this is really key, that spirituality is the foundation for a loving world. I think we can look at lots of situations in our current world and say, where is God in this situation? Whether it's in politics or, politics covers everything, but, politics or institutions, all those different things. And we say, why would they be this way? Or why would they do this? Don't they believe don't they have a spiritual background or a spiritual side to them that says this is wrong? And this is what spirituality really has to offer to the world today, is this loving foundation for how we are with each other in this creation. So that's very important to this study. People describe feeling spiritual when they knelt to pray to God, when they looked up at the stars in awe, when they faced an uncertain future or a difficult loss, when they listened closely to someone unlike themselves. We have found spirituality in the tradition of our grandparents, in traditions that we did not inherit, and in no tradition at all. We found a strong thread weaving together individuals and communities around the world, a common thread with the ability to fashion a vibrant view of spirituality today. We have what we talk about what denominations are and that, and then we have a term, sometimes maybe you've heard the term ecumenical. And ecumenical is a term used to describe or to refer to discussions, connections between Christian denominations and or at least denominations such of Christianity and Judaism. I mean, we used to use the term for that. Today we talk, people use the term interspiritual, which means Christians talking to Buddhists, and Buddhists talking to Hindus, and Muslims talking to Jews, all these different connections whenever we do that. So it's more of an interspiritual thing. And that's what this basic truth that the Svetzer study found connects with, that spirituality is the foundation for a loving world. In other words, people can be in their own faith traditions, their own spirituality, their own practices, but there is this spirituality of love that unites all people. So they boiled this down into what they call the many ways of being spiritual, that we are spiritual. The first category they were able to sort this into was what they call visualization and verbalization. In other words, how do people describe spirituality from themselves? And their major finding is that participants' written and visual descriptions revealed spirituality as complex, diverse, and nuanced phenomenon. So I think those words speak for themselves. It's complex, it's diverse, and it can be very nuanced. You might find that when you talk with somebody from another faith tradition and they express a value. And you say, well, we have that value too, but it's kind of a little different. But it seems the same, but different at the same time. Secondly, they found out what they're calling spiritual self-identification. In other words, to what extent do people consider themselves spiritual both within and beyond religious traditions? And again, that might sound a little odd. How can you be spiritual if you're not part of a tradition? But as you'll see, the study found that being spiritual without being religious or denominational is a possibility. And regardless of what we think or what maybe the media tells us, or that we pick up from news or whatever, that a vast majority of people consider themselves both spiritual and religious. Not just spiritual, but spiritual and religious. So they have some kind of religious practice on their own, some spiritual practice. Half of those who identify as spiritual but not religious, or neither spiritual nor religious, grew up in a religion but left religion. Again, there's a lot of people out there who have left formal faith traditions or religions. They, we used to say we had fallen away Catholics, fell away from the church. And really today we like to think of it as inactive. They've become inactive in their faith because we believe that whether you acknowledge it or not, when you're baptized, especially, you are a member of the church. And you can't really, it's very hard to separate oneself from that experience. But a lot of people today don't identify with formal religious denominations or religious groups. And yet that spiritual but not religious group is still very big. Sometimes it's said, the largest Christian denomination are Catholics, Roman Catholics, and the second largest are inactive Roman Catholics. So we know that that's a challenge that's with the church today. So many people who identify with any religion today still consider themselves spiritual to some extent. The next category they looked at was belief. What do people believe about a higher power, whatever they name it? And they found that 3 in 4 people believe in a higher power, and more than half have no doubts about that belief. But they also found not everyone who considers themselves spiritual believes in a higher power. Especially in some forms of Buddhism, there really is no higher power other than the high power of the teaching of Buddha. So it's an atheistic, in other words, no one God, no God traditions, more philosophical. So that's very possible and still be very spiritual in the broadest sense of the word. Experiences. How do people experience spirituality on a daily basis? They found that half of respondents expressed frequently feeling the presence of a higher power or divine being. Over half of people who reported strong belief, who express strong belief, feel a presence each day. Some of those who do not believe in a higher power or doubt still report having these experiences at least once in a while. So whether they can name it as such, people who do not practice a faith tradition on a regular basis still have religious experiences. Goes back to part of that definition of Merku's definition. It's part of us. We are spiritual beings living in a spiritually saturated universe. At least 1 in 10 who don't believe in a higher power, and at least 1 in 4 who don't know whether a higher power exists, still feel divine love at least once in a while. 2 in 3 people frequently feel touched by the beauty of creation, probably the most common experience that we all have. is that we're in this creation. And we like sunsets, we like going to the mountains or, sitting at a lake. 3 in 4 people frequently feel thankful for their blessings, whether that's that experience of creation or other or material blessings. The next area is what they call aspiration. How do people see spirituality as part of the type of person they want to be? In other words, not how I am, but how I aspire to be. 3 in 5 people aspire to be more spiritual, and those who see themselves as very spiritual aspire to be even more so. Nearly half of people say they have become more spiritual over the course of their lives. That's good news, huh? Practices. What practices do people engage in as a part of their regular spiritual practice? Nearly half of people say they are a member of a spiritual or religious community. Very interesting. That's not what we think right away, but that's what this showed. People give examples of all types of formal and informal civic or pro-social activities they consider to be spiritual. In other words, spirituality in action. Whether that's direct service to people or being an advocate for people, all those things that are covered in our tradition in Catholic social teaching. And then they have a group of findings which they categorize as spirituality in action. In other words, this exploring the relationship between spirituality, community, civic, and political action. Relationship with civic action is the first category. Are people who identify as more spiritual more likely to engage in their communities and believe it's important? The more strongly a person identifies as spiritual, the more likely they are to believe it is very important to contribute to greater good in the world. And they are more likely to engage with others for the good of their community. Next is accountability. How does a sense of accountability inform the way that people connect inner spirituality and their outer action? And it says a majority felt accountable to a higher power for the impact that their spirituality needs to have on the world. And it says, those who feel this accountability have a higher chance of being or caring about making a difference in their communities, and they do take action. In terms of connecting, to what do people experience a sense of connection, and how does it relate to their outer action? 68% of people reported feeling connected to a higher power of some kind. 68. 60% of people report feeling connected to all of humanity. So that's a little over half. And I think that's a very crucial point for us today, is how do we get people to understand that it's not just me. I'm not the rugged individualist out on the frontier, and it's me and you against the world, or just me against the world. We're in this together. And I think that's something that's really important as we especially now approach our election is, how are we going to do this together? And how do we unite people under noble causes? In civic life, their perception of civic life, what do they believe about their relationship between spirituality and the way they engage in the world? 2 in 3 people believe that their spirituality guides how they act in the world. In other words, on a daily basis, at work, in our families, in our homes. 3 in 5 people say that spirituality inspires them to give back to their community. So as a gift, they feel they've received this gift, they want to give back in some way. And I think we all feel that way at times. And, especially ramps up at this time of the year as we get closer to the holidays. But, in July, those needs are still there. So it's important to keep that alive throughout the year. Just under half of people say that their spirituality influences their political views, and even fewer say it influences their political activities. So the dualism of our beliefs and politics is something that at times we really struggle with, and it comes up in all the campaigns and that. And some people say it's just too complicated, so they try and separate it. There's a wonderful document that I encourage you to read. You can find it online in our own tradition that's called Faithful Citizenship. It's put out by the United States Catholic Bishops. It talks about our role in the community and how our political involvement is important as an expression of our faith. And they finally say conversation with others open people's eyes to connection between their own spirituality and the way they engage in the world. In other words, there are people who are out there who are engaged in the world, but they don't think about it as a spiritual experience. But when they start to talk with others, they begin to be able to unpack that experience. And I think that's a really important part of our tradition, is that, by sharing with others and talking about it, having civil and respectful conversations, that we not only learn about other spirituality, but we begin to realize what we value and what's important to us. And finally, I think we're running pretty close to time. How are we on time, Eloy? Okay, great. So that's a really broad overview of this study. You can find more online about Fetzer and what they found out. I would say there's lots for us to think about in this. It could be used as a spirituality checkup for ourselves. How do we think about these things? How do we approach it? And I would really encourage you to learn more about spirituality, because I believe that it's just an essential element of our human experience that's really crucial for our world at this point, is to begin to live a spiritual life. Today we have all kinds of opportunities to engage in spiritual practices because we can do it online. There are many resources that can be used, and I don't, somewhere I have a list of those which I could send to folk, to Eloy or Laura, and they could pass it on to you. It's rather old, so I'm sure there are many more. One that's very popular in Catholic circles today is one that is done by Father Richard Rohr. It's a daily, simple little meditation that comes. And I don't mean simple in the sense of, it's easy. It's easy to read, but it gives you really important things to think about. And a lot of people find that very useful. There's the Jesuits. If you Google Jesuit spirituality resources, you'll find all kinds of different resources that are online. I know a very popular one is from the Irish Jesuits that people like. There are daily scripture studies. There are daily quotes that will come to you through texts. So there's a lot of opportunities today that we haven't had in the past. You don't have to, as we all know, we don't go to the bookstore that much and buy a book and read it. We might read it online or order it on Amazon. But I encourage you to dig deeper, both into your personal spirituality, into our own tradition, and seek to understand other world traditions too, because we really believe that we have things to learn from them in this era. Vatican II made a really important point about that, and that is that if we believe as Christians that that truth is from God and can't come from anywhere else. Wherever we find truth in other traditions, it can't be anything but God revealing it to those folks. So, we find that connection everywhere, wherever we find truth and goodness. And as the study said, wherever we found love expressed in the world. So that's a quick run through. How are we doing on time, Eloy?
We have about 5 or 10 minutes. Do you want to take some questions if anybody has some questions?
Sure, that would be great. Perfect. Just so you know, there's and you probably noticed this too, there's about a 5-second delay. So it's not sure what that's about.
You guys have any questions?
Again, when was the Fetzer Institute? When was the study conducted?
January to February 2020. Yeah, so it's before the pandemic, which is interesting. So it'd be interesting to, redo the, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
Because as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm thinking that for me during the pandemic, spirituality has actually been more of an emphasis for me because you couldn't practice necessarily in the same way as your religious faith. You couldn't receive communion. You couldn't do the traditional things. But then, being out, it's forced us to go outside more, or like find different ways to connect with our faith and our spirituality, to connect with other people differently and just try to see the spirit in different forms or different ways. So oops, I'm moving. Okay. So that's I was thinking to myself, well, I think it's been a change in maybe increasing the spirituality piece of it.
Yes, and that was I did a program yesterday and a little bit Friday night and yesterday, a little mini retreat for some parishes in Menominee Falls. And we were talking about that very thing of, we've had time to think about spiritual things more, but we've also been cut off in many ways from our faith communities and learning how to do what we, receive what we received in the past from our religious communities. Some people find streaming to be wonderful. In fact, we talked about the fact that some people are commenting that, I like streaming. I don't know if I'll ever go back to church. I'm just going to watch it. And yet another person shared about how she serves as a Eucharistic minister. And when she was first back and able to do that, she had this revelation, this insight when she started to, distribute communion to people, that that's what really, that seeing it and feeling it and tasting it and touching it is really what communicates it in its best sense. So you can't have that when you're not present. So anyway, we talked a lot about, the pluses and minuses of the spiritual meanings of our COVID experience.
Group, and whether it's here in person or virtually, I think a lot of us have missed the opportunity to connect the way we have in the past. So hopefully this is a first step and trying to figure this out. And I think, we welcome your feedback on this, and we're continuing to discuss how we can continue to offer these sessions and the best way to do that, whether it's completely virtual or some in person. We do have some limited space down here. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3. We have about 12 people down here with us today. So, I think we'll continue to go forward. Oh, we do
Good.
have another question for you, Jim.
Okay, sure.
Why do you think the numbers aren't lower for people that consider themselves Catholic but not practicing Catholics?
Are you saying not lower or are lower?
Lower. Not lower.
Come on.
Okay,
Not
I'm
lower.
not catching.
I'm echoing.
I'm not catching the question. I'm sorry.
Do I say it again?
Yeah.
Not lower.
Could you-
Sorry, we're echoing downstairs, so that's why we're laughing.
I know there was a great little cacophony there. So could you say the question again?
This new skill.
What's the question?
Okay, I asked the question. I need the screen. Okay. Why do you think the numbers are not lower for people that consider themselves Catholic but not practicing Catholics? Are not lower for people that consider themselves Catholic?
I'm not sure if I implied that in any way. People talk about, but I can comment on it. People talk about, it's kind of a running joke in a way, or we make light of it, but it's true that you might not be a practicing Catholic, but if you were brought up in the Catholic tradition, it shapes how you think and act, whether you go to church or not, or whether you say, I believe any of that stuff or not anymore. It shapes us as people. And that's true of all traditions, I think, that it's really hard to completely disconnect from your tradition. I mean, illness and, mental illness and that aside, but just we might say somebody does something horrible out of a sense of, mental illness or, as we say, by reason of insanity. But a lot of people in the world who say they aren't practicing Catholics anymore, I'm not Catholic anymore, but they really are. Because Catholic is so broad. That's what the word means. Everything. Openness to all truth, openness to all that is good. And it really connects us with everything. So it's a little bit harder. I have a friend who she had been a Catholic Christian formation minister and had her degree from the seminary, and really felt called to ministry. So she became a Methodist minister. And she said that her first couple congregations would often point out to her, they'd say, well, your Catholic is showing. And she'd say, oh, really? She said, I thought that, I kind of moved on. But they said, oh, no, 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 no. And they were fine with it. They were fine with it, So it's really hard to separate oneself completely. I hope that answers your question.
Jim, that was good. That was useful. Anybody else? I don't see any other questions here on the screen. Anyone else here have any questions? Thoughts, comments? So as I mentioned, we're going to continue to optimize this and figure out the best way to do this and share this with you. Our committee is continuing to meet and, to try to think of different ways to continue the lifelong learning program. But we would welcome any ideas from you. So feel free to, email us, put some comments in the Facebook section, however you want to communicate what you think would be next steps. Right now, we're thinking maybe just trying to do the same schedule, or maybe even just once a month, just so that we can continue to connect, and then see where January brings us, and potentially maybe we can do a little bit more together, but we'll see how that all nets out. As you know, this is just all changing as we go, so we're trying to adapt. But we thank Jim so much for being here today to at least be able to bring us together, and connect us spiritually, together. And I think that's, again, the ways that we're trying to be here with each other as much as possible through the Spirit if we can't be here in present. So I think that's all. The video will remain online. I know there's a question about that, so if you missed the beginning, you will be able to watch it recorded. And Jim's email is in the Facebook comments on Facebook Live as well, and YouTube, I
Good.
guess both. So if you need
Good. If
to,
people have questions.
you can contact Jim for the handout if you would like to receive that. We couldn't print them because of the COVID issue, but you can contact Jim and he can send you an email with that information.
Absolutely.
Okay, Jim, say some last words here. We have to kind of go back and forth, otherwise I echo in the downstairs here.
Okay. Well, I'd like to, let's see if there's one of these quotes that I would share as my parting quote, and I think I know which one it is. If I can find it. For some reason, my handout printed landscape, so it's kind of confusing. This is one that I've always liked, and it is, again, I will find it. Oh, helps if you have all the pages. This is by a wonderful author by the name of Parker Palmer. He, you may have heard him if you ever listened to NPR. He has written many things on spirituality in the broadest sense. He comes out of the Quaker tradition. And he says, we are not mortal beings on a spiritual journey. We are spiritual beings on a mortal journey. So that's what I would leave you with, is that idea that, you know, we are spiritual beings and we're on this mortal journey, and it's where our spirituality speaks to us, where God speaks to us, and it's just this rich environment for finding that love, which is God. Amen. Thanks for having me. I hope whatever you're going to do next is great.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate that. That's a good way to sign off. And now, in our tradition, we don't have any food downstairs here for any of us, unfortunately, due to the situation. But we hope that you can all share a meal together with those around you and go off and be spiritual together. So thank you for joining us today, in home or on screen. So thank you. Have a good day. Take care. Until next time.